Solar Options for Schools develops the sort of software platform that enables us to do this, to develop projects on schools, to then monitor and manage those systems, and then do a lot of the online education. But because a lot of schools don't have the money to fund them, we also created the not-for-profit Solar for Schools CBS, which I'm also still a director of, and it has a number of other voluntary directors that come from the schools themselves. And the CBS is the one that then raises the money, funds the projects, and then anything that's left over in the pot at the end of once all the investors have been repaid goes back to the schools.
So we've spoke in person to over 35,000 school pupils this year between the team. Of that, there's around 9,000 have been secondary, but the majority of them have actually been primary school, about 25,000 students there. And that's been through lots of different means. So we always generally start with an assembly. And then follow up with a workshop. So this workshop is always bespoke to the school. For some schools, it's a science element of renewable energy. Others, it might be an eco team or the school council who want to grow into an eco team. We arrive at different schools on different journeys. And for those people who are very aware of education, the picture at this moment, sustainability is still really very new. In the whole picture of things. The government have got objectives for every school for 2025 to have a sustainability lead. So for some schools, this is already happening. I worked as a director of sustainability for 18 years before joining here. But in most schools, there isn't anybody. So new roles, we often support teachers as well. But the most enjoyable thing is to see the children wanting to cause their own action from what we do. So when we go in, we have a solar ambassador scheme where the children will then, when we leave, go on to report how the energy is faring, how much energy is generated. They will talk in assemblies to the other pupils of the year groups. And some of our secondary schools go out to primary schools to help them as well. So it's not just that one visit, it's that next step as well. Which I think is very important. And a lot of teachers do appreciate that time where they can sit back and learn a little bit more about sustainability themselves, have their own thoughts about which direction their school goes in. There's lots of different ways we can bring it alive. We have drones that we take to inspect the panels at the same time. So can you imagine how enthusiastic some of the children are seeing the drone? And obviously we do STEM workshops. It's lots of things that instigate action. A lot of questions. We have a lot of questions from the children and the teachers. So often we go back and do some CPD sessions for teachers. You'd be surprised about how much adults have never had this because it's not been in their education. If you think about where we all sustainability is only just mentioned in the geography and the science curriculum at this moment in time, there's a big push at the moment to improve that across schools. So it's schools who've gone above and beyond the curriculum who've done this. So it's nice to actually have the people behind the scenes more involved as well. We have site supervisors. I went over to All Saints at Ilkley, and the site supervisor helps run that. Absolutely enthusiastic. Is there gardening with the children, as well as showing them how the data works on our website. The children manipulate that and they put it on the newsletter every week. So for us, it's, we're like planting a seed and those roots go deep within the school. And each year it grows a little bit more. And more importantly, we're not there just to instigate a one-off educational piece. We're in there to give something that the teachers can then embed themselves, and we can come back and do something different for them, give them ideas, and start, it's sparking that imagination. So if we're giving them education, if we're talking to them about, well, actually, if you're going to have an electric heater on, you really need to be heating one space rather than several spaces with this to be more efficient, understand how power works and energy. So therefore, at home, they can hopefully take this knowledge home and save their parents some money as well. All right. So we're always looking beyond. That's why, we've got a community benefit society. We like to think it involves not just a school community, but beyond the community as well. Within those homes, the grandparents, their aunties, the people that are going around to do, everyone's happy to switch lights off, but most people don't realize that the lights are probably one of the least power hungry. So we're always looking for that. So the app as well. So you've got the panelizer as one point, but the other point, there's four different sections: energy, electricity, efficiency, and the environment, as well as our solar section to teach them all about solar energy. But these weave into the curriculum. So Key Stage 2, which is primary school, and Key Stage 3 for secondary school, all the way up to GCSE. And this is presented in a way that's not exactly the same as in school. So children aren't going, not again. There's plenty of educational apps out there, but ours is a different thing. It's got the curriculum embedded below the surface, so children can do this as a gamified option. They can go through, watch the videos, they're literally very short 2-minute videos, short engagement, quick questions, quizzes at the end. But probably for those teachers who are listening to this, if there is any, the fact that the teachers can monitor the progress as well. So they can actually set this for homework and alleviate some class time and preparation time because it's already done.
Where the national grid kicks in is that often, if we're trying to balance raising money from bondholders and offering them an attractive enough rate of return to attract their investment in the first place, you then, at the current 5.5% that we're offering, we can't do small schools. So small schools economics just don't stack up. They don't consume enough electricity to have a big enough system to have economies of scale, and therefore they're quite expensive. And therefore the electricity that that system would generate would be more than their mains price. So the school doesn't go ahead. And where the national grid helps is that, and other corporates could do this too, is that they came to us and said, we'd like to donate some systems to schools in deprived areas. And we said, that's a lovely idea, but we don't suggest you recommend a small system to these schools because typically they get ignored, forgotten, and abandoned. We often get the case where a school rings us up and says, we'd like to solar panels. We say, well, you've already got some. And they had no idea they even had them. And that was because it was added as part of an extension and often never even plugged in or switched on, or even when it was, they stopped running after a year or two and they don't even notice. So what we said to the National Grid is rather than donating small systems that are actually rather insignificant and have a sort of detrimental effect, other people expect to get one donated for free too, contribute towards systems where we can't get the economics to work. So the national grid tops up maybe 20-30% of the total cost of the system. The rest of it is funded through bondholders, and that enables us to give that small school a bigger system that is a meaningful size, enables us to do the education piece, enables us to provide a level of buffer and security because a quarter or a third of the system's been funded by the national grid and the rest being funded by bondholders. But it also enables us to really focus on schools that otherwise couldn't have solar, and in particular schools in areas of deprivation. So the national grid ranks who we give the grants to based on the level of free school meals they have in their area.
Going back to impact, I think there's one really good stat in the offer document. So if one were to invest £1,000 in this offer, firstly, you'd save a school £2,000 to £3,000 in terms of electricity costs. That's important. You'd stop 1 ton of CO2 emissions, and you would educate 20 to 25 students on energy and decarbonisation. And obviously, in addition to that, that £1,000 would attract £555 of interest a year, totaling 220 over 5 years. But since you've started, what can you say about the totality, the aggregate of carbon emissions?
So the way we calculate carbon emissions is based on displacing grid electricity in the UK. And grid electricity in the UK is actually quite clean. It's now dropped below 200 grams per kilowatt hour. That's the average grid intensity of the grid. So we then take the number of kilowatt hours we've generated and multiply it by that number across the history of the systems we've been building. It adds up about 13,000 tons. Now, some people might go, wow, 13,000 tons sounds like a lot. In the overall schemes of CO2, it's a relatively small number. If you had to convert it into something that you could tangibly feel or talk about, it's the equivalent, roughly, of planting 13,000 trees, watching them grow for 25 years, carefully chopping them down, and then burying them for the rest of eternity. Not trivial to do either, and that would be quite an expensive exercise. So the 13,000 tons in that context, given that it didn't actually cost anything to do, it's actually saved schools money at the same time and generated a return to those who've made it happen, is quite attractive and quite interesting because it's additional to all the other benefits. It hasn't cost anyone anything to achieve that. But I think the biggest impact, and we talked about that earlier, is from the education. Going into school and saving that school to 10 tons of CO2 a year is not insignificant. It's nice to have, yes. But the 100 or say 120 students in that school, if they go home and help their parents switch to a green electricity supplier, maybe take one less long distance holiday and take a train instead, maybe switch to a car when their car breaks down next, or use public transport more often, or just be aware how much energy it costs to run a bath versus your light switches, then they could easily, each of those families, save a ton or two per year. Yeah, so that's 120 students times 2 tons. That's 240 tons versus what's been saved at the school, maybe 10 tons a year. So we sometimes say that the impact of the education is at least 10 times greater than the direct reduction from the CO2 emissions from installing solar in the UK. So that's just looking back. One of our earliest bonds was 2016, which wasn't a huge amount of money. It was £215,000. That was repaid. We then had another one in 2017, which was also quite small. It was about 150,000. That's been fully repaid. They were all repaid on their fourth or fifth year anniversary. Some of them were slightly shorter. In 2018, we had 1 million, just over £1 million that was raised that year, and that's now been fully repaid. And the most recent one was in 2019, which was just repaid a few weeks ago for about £1 million. So between them, we've repaid a total of 2.5 to bondholders. Having said that, between half and 2/3 then reinvest again. So in the most recent one, it was just under 2/3 reinvested again. So it sort of stayed in the family, but those who needed the money have been repaid as promised. I think I've always said, again, with my two hats, when we first started them, those who invested in the software development platform, I said that's highly risky money. Only invest if you can afford to lose it and still buy me a beer if that's the case. On the bonds, that's the one I said, look, if we lose your money there, we deserve to be kicked pretty hard. Yeah, unless it's, a massive weather thing that's kind of outside of our control. And, given the way climate change is going, if we don't tackle it soon, these will become bigger issues. But the sun is a pretty reliable supplier. Solar panels are pretty stable bits of kit. They do occasionally fail, but it's all pretty predictable. We've got reserves built in for swapping out inverters as they fail, because they will fail. So that's all pretty predictable. The bits that we can get wrong is our forecast around how much schools consume, but we've now got 150 plus 170 schools now that we can monitor and we know. So we get better at fine-tuning the model going forward. We can add levels of conservatism with future projects to counterbalance any changes that we see through the portfolio. So it's a relatively safe investment. We try really, really hard to make it as safe as possible, because unless we make it safe, we can't attract low-cost funding. And unless it's low-cost funding, we can't deliver a benefit to the schools. So we're constantly trying to fine-tune the balance between the two, to make it safe for the schools, safe and attractive for the schools, and safe and attractive for those who support the work we're doing.
Cool.
The only thing I might add is that we've been working very hard on our systems and processes to be able to bring down the minimum amount of investment. It used to be £500, but we're really keen to widen the circle of contributors and supporters. I mean, our bondholders are super supportive. They love what we do, and they often contribute and introduce us to schools. So we're keen to expand that network and allow more individuals who love what we're doing to be part of it, and therefore have dropped the threshold from 500 to 50.